everyone. My name is Hennie and I'm from the Department of Consumer and Food Sciences at the University of Pretoria in South Africa. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 11th International Conference on Food Studies that takes place virtually this year again. And we're sorry that we can't be there to see each other, and it runs out of Copenhagen. And the theme for this year is making sense of taste. So I am on the advisory board of the Food Studies Conference, and this is just a little fun piece to make you aware of a little special bread that we have in South Africa. So this is an adaptation of a bread that is locally made, or a whole range of breads that are made in South Africa, and they have various words depending on which culture makes them or which in which region they are made. But for today we are making something that Xhosa people refer to as Idombolo, and we have decided to make it in a rather pretty style. So it has a little shape of an Asian steamed bun, and they are flavored with something really spectacular that I will talk about in a moment. So I would like to start the dough because that is going to proof, and as soon as it's made, the dough, I will tell you a little bit about the special flavoring ingredient. So in fact, this is what we have here, and this is a powder of a indigenous plant that is called Mondia white tea, and it is also in the local language referred to as Umundi. And when we get to talk about it, you'll see that it has this unusual, delightful combination flavor between vanilla, cinnamon. Some of the literature even talks about marzipan, so it's really great. So this is not at all anything unusual in terms of the actual recipe. I have 400 grams of bread flour there. I have a whole 10 grams of instant yeast that is going to go in, and that is simply because these need to puff up quite spectacularly. There's quite a little bit of salt in, 7.5 mils. There's about 10 mils of sugar in there, and then the 5 mils to probably around 10 mils of the Umundi powder that is going to go in there. And then there's a little bit of oil in. This is olive oil, but it could be just sort of canola oil or sunflower oil as well. I have 240 mils of water in here. This is probably slightly hot, so let it cool there for a moment. I want to just turn my steamer off for a moment and to just show you what I have done here when we talk about it next time. So in the pot here we have just water, and I have 3 little stands. One can make various ways of making a steamer. You can do it in a wok, like most of the Asian countries, but this is just a homemade little jobby. And then I have a plate here that don't have too many sort of slopes in it, so it's just a plate that comes in quite nice in fact, and that just has to sit in the pot quite nicely like that. And these steam for nothing more than 10 minutes or so. So they are really quite fast and easy and wonderful to make. So the plate there, the pot with the water, and those will steam at quite high heat. But as I say, they can stand that there for a moment until we're ready to do that. Good, so I think our water is slightly cooled down a little bit, so I'm going to add that to the mix, and I just want to add it all in and hydrate this for a second, all the flour before I knead it. And we do want to knead it. One can knead this by hand. You don't have to do it in the machine. I have the machine ready here, so I'm going to slip that in there. And that is going to knead for a little while. So, steamed breads in South Africa are often made in various ways. They can be steamed in a pot, in a bowl of water. They can be steamed in a plastic bag, and we have a franchise in South Africa that is called Checkers, which is a supermarket group. And in South Africa, we often refer to a plastic bag as a Checkers bag. And so one can make your Idombolo in a Checkers bag if you have to. But you can also make these little dumplings so that they sit on top of the stew, and that is quite a cross-cultural way of doing steamed buns in South Africa, or steamed breads. Of course, this doesn't have to be made in little breads, little buns. They can be made into a big bread, and there's often lots of local flours and grains that are used, sorghum, teff, that are included in these breads, and they have got a wonderful nuttiness, a really great earthy aroma, and they are really quite delicious. So perhaps if you want to make these, you want to think if you want to incorporate them as part of a stew, or do you want to just have them straight like we are doing today without anything. These, as I say, are made along the Asian style of buns, and I'm not going to try and pronounce the Chinese word for these buns, but they are really quite beautiful in the technique. And again, one doesn't have to do them like that, but because they take a little bit of practice, you can just make round little buns, but you can also just make one big bun if you would wish to do that. So the reason why this needs a little bit is that there's a slight little bit of gluten development, and that will just hold nice structure when they are steamed. They actually last quite nicely. They are really quite delicious the next day, and I actually in research also read that sometimes, not in a South African context, but in a Southeast Asian context, the buns might be refried again the next day. So I didn't mention this, but the Mondia powder, or the Umundi powder, that would probably not be something that you would be able to find. So I suggest to take the recipe, and the recipe is available on the conference website, to take some mixed spice or even some own combination of mixed spices like cinnamon, a little bit of tiny little bit of cloves, a little bit of nutmeg, and you can just make up quite a nice little mix there. I would even put a little bit of finely ground black pepper in there, and that will give you something that's similar to the Umundi that we are doing. So that I think is good. I don't think we need to knead that any further. And as you can see, that is really quite a nice little dough. I'm going to now leave that so that it proves the first time. We can put a tiny spot of oil in here in the same bowl, and I'm going to just swirl that around and turn it upside down, and that is going to be covered with a tea towel, and that can just now be placed aside for a little while until it's proved. So we will get back to the process in a moment. I just want to now quickly chat about the Umundi. And I have a tray here with all sorts of goodies, and now you can't see me because I'm through a forest here, but there we are. So it is October, beginning of October in South Africa now, and we in the southern hemisphere, so we're going into summer now, and this is just one of the first shoots of the Umundi, and you can see it is a really amazing creeper plant. These have got wonderful health properties, and I think it's the first time that we've really experimented using the bark. So there's a problem with these in South Africa, that they are being harvested quite extensively, and most often their roots are used, and when the plant is taken out, of course it then dies. So it would be worth further research to investigate the sensory differences between the bark and the root, because if the health properties and the sensory properties of the bark is similar to the root, then obviously one can rather use the root. So this is what it looks like. It's just a piece of bark like that is sliced off the creeper, and the creeper heals very quickly. Our garden curator here at the university, Jason Sampson, says that the plant heals extremely well. So what we did is we took some of the bark and we let it just dry, and this is quite brittle now, you can see, and then we put it in a spice grinder and ground it up and got this really fantastic powder. So there's my little jar of powder, and it is completely wonderful. I wish I could have you smell this. It is slightly sweet, it's slightly cinnamony, it's slightly nutmeg, it's slightly allspice, it's slightly juniper berry. It is just wonderful. And as I say, literature says there's even a little bit of marzipan in there, which I have to agree with. So in South Africa, when we have green leafy vegetables, they are generically referred to as merogo. So this is also one of the merogo plants, and these are possibly leaves from last season, so they slightly hard and rubbery, where these are just wonderful. They new fresh leaves. One would take them off. We have cooked them before, saute them in a little bit of butter, salt and pepper, and they are completely delicious. So quite a vigorous creeper. It goes all over the show. It has wonderful looking seed pods. You can see how beautiful those are, and then they have these fluffy little wind transported seeds that go all over the show. So yes, there's a whole packet of the little seeds, and as I say, they are really quite wonderful. There's a lot of indigenous knowledge around them, uses, and definitely worth investigating these further as a cultural plant, as a plant with a lot of unexplored possibilities here. So we've just used this as a flavorant in the Idombolo. It's definitely not a traditional dish. The Idombolo is a traditional dish, but that is seldomly flavored. So this is a little bit of a culinary innovation, modern recipe that takes something like the Morocco, Mondia Morocco, and adapts it into something that is really quite delicious. So I'm going to leave you for a second while the first proofing takes place. Then we will come back. We're going to shape those. We'll stop again and let them proof again after they've been shaped, and then we're going to steam them and show you the final product. So we're back at our Idombolo, our steamed Dombolo buns with Mondia flavoring in, and as you can see, these have now the dough has proofed nicely. It's almost double in bulk, and that is quite fine. So much like Asian steamed buns, these are sort of separated with a little layering of oil, and in many of the Asian recipes for these particular buns, there's green onions or scallions that's thinly sliced that separates the layers. But one can do a variety of things. I chose today to use some black sesame seeds. So in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put some olive oil into the black sesame seeds, and that is just to sort of carry them around when we do the rolling. And then I'm going to take my dough out. I want to put a little bit of oil on the work surface, and this can be done with flour, but it actually, because these are steamed, work quite well with the little bit of oil as well. So what we want to do is we want to roll this now into quite a long sort of rectangle, and I'm going to just roll that out. And you can see that the oil prevents the dough from sticking, but as I say, if you want to use a little bit of flour, you can also do that. And try to keep the corners nice and square. Good. They're not too thin, but need to be quite thinnish. Good. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put these black sesame seeds and the oil onto 2/3 of the rectangle and spread that out all the way. So the 2/3 being 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 of the length of the. Good. And then we're going to flip this third over onto there, and then just press it down quite nicely, and then this third over onto there as well. So now that oil that is in between the layers will create the separation when you make these. So many of these little Asian bun rolls say that one now should cut them into different thicknesses, and so what I want to say is that we're going to just, these make about 11 or 12, so I'm cutting these beginning ones slightly thinner than the ones that I will do later, but don't fret about that. They just sort of happens naturally that they work out like that. So these end ones are slightly broader, but really, and that's just because I'm going to put two on top of each other now. So now I'm going to take one and put it on top of a broader one. Good. We have 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Good. So now is the fun trick part. So I have a plate that they're going to go on. I have my steamer ready, but they have to proof another time. So what you do is you take two sandwiched like this, you take your chopstick, you press down quite hard, remove the chopstick, pull them slightly, and then you're going to take your chopstick again and twist twice, and then you press down. And you have these rather attractive looking little rolls that are going to really proof quite nicely. So I'm going to do that a little bit slower again next time so that you can follow that. And I'm spacing them a little bit because they have to still proof there. So down with the chopstick, pick it up, pull it, and then the chopstick in the back again, and give it two twists like that, and then quite firmly press down so that the bottom can get stuck onto the top, onto the bottom. And as you can see, the sesame seeds give quite nice interest there, but you can really use anything. You don't have to put anything either. You can just do it without these sort of thin separations in between if you want to. Because there's quite a lot of yeast in here, these are actually already starting to proof there, which is nice because the yeast also gives quite a nice little flavor to them. They're quite sort of yeasty and bready. You're going to enjoy making these at home and perhaps give them some local flavor as well at home, particularly if you don't have access to the Mondia, but really just to celebrate the steaming process of breads, but also in context of the taste of the Mondia and the flavor. Good, there we are, all of them done. And as I say, this is just a dozen or so, but one could probably make the recipe double and make quite a number of them. So they rise quite big, so we need to give them enough space there to swell up and proof. So I'm going to now cover those again with a damp tea towel, and they need to proof quite well. They don't steam a long time, they only steam about 10 minutes. So wrap them now and leave them again, and when they're ready I'll pop them in and we'll stop again and continue when they're done. We're back now, and these, as you can see, have proved really quite nicely. So I have a pot with my water boiling there, and I'm going to just simply slip these into there and lid on, and they go back on the heat and they cook for 10 minutes. So our Idombolo buns are almost done now, and the pot is steaming away here, so it's going to be big reveal now. So thank you for watching, thank you for attending the 11th International Food Studies Conference that happens out of Copenhagen virtually this year. Hopefully next year we will see each other in New York at Marymount University, and we can meet up and have a good meal somewhere in New York. But I'm going to now show you our Mondia version of our steamed buns. So yeah, it goes. Voila! And you can see they are really quite gorgeous. They steamingly hot. And yes, as I say, they light and airy, they totally beautifully fluffy, and one can smell the Mondia right through them. They smell a little bit of something that I'm not sure what it is. It's slightly savory, but slightly sweet as well, and recognizable, but at the same time you're not sure what it is. So all about taste and flavor. Delicious, wonderful. Thank you for joining. Bye.